Imagine that you're flushing the toilet, but instead of the water splashing, you hear a powerful explosion. You barely have enough time to feel your legs, arms, and face get pierced with pain before you faint. Sadly, this is a true story, and it's just one of many that miraculously didn't end in tragedy, which I'll tell you about in this video. So, viewer discretion is advised. On October 2nd, 2013, Michel Pierre's most pressing issue was the lack of water supply in his NY 16-story building. However, that was only until he decided to check if the water was back on. The man pushed the flush button on his toilet, and an explosion ensued that very second. Only after regaining consciousness did Michel realize what had happened. His toilet had exploded into countless small, sharp porcelain shards. They sprayed Pierre's entire body, and he had to have 30 stitches, most of them on his face. Moreover, on that same day, 3 more toilets exploded in the building, but only Pierre ended up nearby in the moment of collapse. As it turned out, there were serious issues with the pipes in Michel's high-rise. During technical service, the pressure rose dramatically, causing the explosion. Apart from that, Michel Pierre sustained psychological trauma and was forced to get used to living with it. That's how strong his fear of the explosion happening again is. His worries are hardly unfounded, since this happens more often than you can imagine. Flushmate Company alone reports over 1,700 explosions of toilets equipped with first and second generation flushing systems. 38 people got hurt. Although the company has recalled the dangerous toilets from the market, you'd better check yours. If it was manufactured by this company between 1997 and 2008, you should replace it just in case. It's a bummer that it's not going to be quite that easy to fix something inside your own body, since even one single innocent sneeze can completely take out your main support pillar, the spine. Victoria Kenny sneezed while watching TV in the evening and found herself unable to move because of unbearable pain and paralysis. Yet what she heard in the hospital later literally ruined her life. She'd be forever bedbound. That is, if she would survive. As it turned out, during the sneeze, Victoria's back muscles contracted with such force that they tore one of her intervertebral discs, although the woman was barely 50 years old. As if that wasn't enough, Victoria's bones compressed her sciatic nerve, causing partial paralysis and incredible pain. This mostly happens when people pick up things that are way too heavy, but the woman had merely sneezed. She underwent 3 spine surgeries, yet nothing helped. Victoria suffered from constant unbearable pain, and her life turned into a nightmare. She wasn't even able to sit. The strong painkillers the woman was taking caused hallucinations, and she didn't recognize her husband and 3 kids. After 2 years of this suffering, Victoria developed depression and even started considering ending it all. Suddenly, hope appeared. The Kenny couple found out about a private clinic that offered surgery that could possibly return Victoria to normal life. The operation was risky and expensive, but it was their only chance. In 4 hours, surgeons inserted a tiny spring between the woman's vertebrae, put a plastic frame around them, and attached a few titanium plates to her bones. When Victoria regained consciousness after the operation, she was utterly confused because the pain was completely gone. Only a week later, the woman was able to walk again. Her personal hell that had continued for 2 years remained nothing but a nightmare. However, it comes back every time Victoria feels an itch in her nose. Terror pierces her, and she does everything in her power to avoid sneezing. And yes, this really can happen to any of us. When Victoria Kenny's story made the headlines, some people claimed they'd been in the same situation. So from now on, be careful when sneezing. However, it's impossible to shelter yourself from everything, as you never know where danger may await you. However, a 48-year-old Italian man must have known he was racing death when speeding on his motorcycle. In 2014, it almost caught up with him when the man had a serious crash. He survived, but when the doctors took him to the hospital, it became clear that something was very wrong with him. His pressure fell to a critically low point, but there was no severe bleeding that could have caused this. Moreover, the medics virtually couldn't hear the man's heartbeat, although he was conscious. If zombies or vampires existed, it could have seemed like the Italian man was turning into the undead. The truth, however, ended up being more realistic, but no less fascinating for the doctors. In the crash, the Italian had broke a few ribs, injured the spleen, and ruptured a lung. The air started coming out of the lung into the chest cavity, causing the heart to turn to the other side. Eventually, the heart had a 90-degree turn, compressing the vessels. This caused a drop in the Italian's blood pressure. As the heart wasn't in its designated place, the doctors couldn't hear it. The case was so unique that it was written about in scientific journals. Firstly, such injuries are incredibly rare. Secondly, despite critically low blood pressure, the patient didn't go unconscious, even once. Thirdly, the man spent hours with a virtually non-functional heart, yet he survived. Moreover, he fully regained his health. It's unknown if the Italian ever rode his motorcycle again. But if yes, he now definitely abides by all traffic regulations. Let's be honest, every one of us breaks a safety rule, or two sometimes, and everything's mostly fine. Yet the rules are there for a reason, as some people end up paying dearly for their recklessness. One of them was 16-year-old Yasser Lopez. On June 7, 2012, he decided to celebrate high school graduation with his friends. However, contrary to the expectation, the teenagers didn't throw a party. Instead, they went spearfishing in Miami lakes. The boys were having fun and boasting their catch. Lopez was inspecting the fish they'd caught when suddenly he felt a strong blow and fell into the water. When he reappeared on the surface, the teenagers went pale with terror.
A spear gun just went through my friend's head. We're in a lake, in First Lake. Please go.
Lopez was standing in the water, looking at the metal spear protruding from his forehead. He was confused, but seemed completely conscious. As it turned out, one of the teenagers took his father's gas underwater firearm. When he was loading the spear into the gun, something went wrong, and the weapon fired. A helicopter took Lopez to the hospital, but the doctors couldn't examine the boy, since the meter-long spear didn't fit inside the medical equipment. So the medics secured Yasser's head and started sawing the spear off with a mechanical cutter. A single wrong move could have killed Lopez, who was conscious that whole time. However, as it turned out, he'd been born under a lucky star. The spear entered the boy's head 2.5 centimeters above the right eye and passed through the brain, pushing against the occipital bone. Yet a few lucky coincidences allowed the boy to stay alive. Firstly, the spear entered the right hemisphere, which is considered less dominant and has fewer blood vessels. Secondly, the spear's angle allowed it to miss the critically important vessel clumps. Yet this didn't mean anything, as the spear was yet to be pulled out. No one knew what was going to happen to Lopez then. A complex surgery on the teenager's brain lasted for 3 hours. He survived, but didn't remember anything and could neither walk nor talk. His life seemed to be over. However, Lopez started rehabilitation and was back to normal surprisingly fast, and in time, he had a full recovery. Yet now Yasser Lopez isn't fond of underwater fishing anymore and takes his safety more seriously. On the other hand, Matthew Brealey, from a suburb of Chesterfield in England, always followed all the rules when mounting his powerful motorcycle. That one day in 2010 wasn't an exception. Brealey was going at a designated speed of around 80 kilometers per hour on an empty country road when an unexpected dot appeared before him. It quickly grew, and the man realized it was a pigeon flying at his eye level. The bird didn't pivot and hit Brealey's helmet, breaking the visor and even the man's glasses. The pigeon died instantly, and the driver went unconscious. However, he wasn't lucky enough to fall off the bike immediately. Miraculously, Brealey stayed seated. Moreover, he inadvertently hit the gas pedal. On a straightaway section of the road, Matthew's high-speed bike developed a staggering 225 kilometers per hour. Then, a mighty oak stood in its way. The Suzuki hit the tree, shattering into tiny pieces, and Brealey was catapulted forward out of his seat to a distance of 180 meters. It's hard to say that he got lucky since he sustained 2 skull fractures with a brain hemorrhage, as well as fractures of a leg, an arm, and ribs. Matthew Brealey spent around 10 weeks in the hospital. The man even had to relearn how to walk, but he did it all for his wife, who was pregnant at the time of the crash. After a long and difficult rehabilitation period, Matthew returned to normal, but to this day, he still can't believe such a bizarre crash happened to him. The police say that birds crashing into motorcyclists is far from being a rare thing. Sadly, it's also impossible to protect yourself from it. But what if something much larger than a pigeon is flying towards you? In 2012, James Crawford was driving his van along a New Jersey motorway. At 7:54 a.m., he reached exit 8 in Mercer County. Suddenly, Crawford noticed a strange, long shadow, and the very next second, the ceiling of his van was torn off like a can lid. The entire passenger side of the vehicle turned into a heap of tin scrap. As it turned out, on the wayside, a building crew was hauling a giant metal beam. Due to unknown reasons, the beam critically tilted to the side and ended up over the roadway. Meanwhile, a man stopped by the damaged van. What he saw made his blood run cold. There was no chance of a person surviving something like that. Yet suddenly, James Crawford started climbing out from under the debris. The biggest mystery isn't even how he survived. It's how he managed to get away with only a few cuts and a broken thumb. The very next day, James was able to go back to work. The case was ruled to be an accident, since it looked like the beam had been moved by a strong gust of wind. The crash that happened to Crawford was a simple coincidence. However, they don't always end quite as well as that. A Texan, Truman Duncan, was working as a switchman at a railway station in June 2006. One day, he hopped onto a train car, moving to a repair dock to accompany it. Duncan had done this 100 times before. This time, he slipped and fell right onto the tracks. The man got on his feet and ran with all his might, but failed to outrun the train. He fell again, and this time, both of his legs got under the iron wheels of the multi-ton train car. In a minute, Duncan regained consciousness after the sudden shock and called the rescuers himself.
Got ran over by the rail doors. I need 911. It's like I'm cutting through. Okay. I need to hurry up now.
What the rescue squad saw upon arrival made them unable to speak. Both of Duncan's legs were entirely cut off, but not only did he survive, he was fully conscious. Almost an hour passed before the rescuers managed to get the man out and take him to the hospital. The paramedics assessed Duncan's survival odds at 1 to 1 million. During the following 3 weeks, he was in a coma and had 20 surgeries. Yet Duncan's lust for life defeated even death. However, 31-year-old Casey Wagner fooled it twice in one day. Truth be told, he kept playing with death constantly, since he was a rodeo bullfighter by profession. Yet, on October 26, 2013, he was performing with well-steered iron bulls at an off-road race in the Texas town of St. Joe. The weather started deteriorating during the day when dark storm clouds covered the sky and it started raining. Wagner hid under one of the small trees, hoping to stay dry. Suddenly, he saw sparks coming out of the tree trunk, and then a flash of blinding light knocked him to the ground. Before Casey had the time to fall and understand what was happening, another flash came. It was an absolute shock since, in just a few seconds, Wagner was hit by lightning twice. A nurse who had seen it all with her own eyes ran up to him. The man appeared to be dying. However, when the ambulance came, he was still conscious. An in-depth examination showed the charge had passed through the man's entire body from his right leg to his left hand, and it didn't cause any damage. Casey Wagner felt some muscle pain, shortness of breath, and strange pins and needles for a few days, and that was it. Research shows that the odds of being hit by lightning in a year in the US are 1 to 750,000. Yet what are the odds of being hit by it twice in a row and remaining completely fine? However, each of us is much more likely to get into another potentially deadly situation, a car crash. Every year, around 1.2 million people die in road accidents, and 50 more million people are injured. So what's the chance of surviving if you get in trouble on the road? On July 19, 2013, 22-year-old U.S. student Morgan Lake finished her classes and embarked on a long journey to see her family. At around 8:30 in the evening, with her peripheral vision, she saw bright headlights from behind and looked in the rearview mirror. A chill ran down Morgan's spine as an 18-wheeler truck was hurtling toward her at full speed. It was steered by a Canadian man named Gabor Labos, who violated at least 4 traffic regulations in that second and didn't notice the drivers ahead of him. The next moment, he hit Morgan's car by pushing it right into the barrier. Then, the car rolled back to the highway, but the truck slammed into it again. Morgan's car was flung a meter up into the air and ended up on a concrete wall over the water. All of this happened on the Chesapeake Bay Bridge in literal seconds. And then time stopped for Morgan entirely, since her car fell into the water and started sinking. On her last breath, Morgan was thrashing in panic in her flooded car. Yet suddenly, the girl thought she wasn't going to die right then and there. She managed to pull herself together, unbuckle her seatbelt, and climb out through the broken windows before running out of oxygen. The girl miraculously managed to reach the bridge's stone mound and stayed there until morning, when she got rescued. An even greater miracle was that Morgan Lake made it out of that situation with only bruises. The car that had been in front of hers stayed on the bridge, and none of its passengers were hurt. Gabor Levos, the truck driver, claimed guilty and was prosecuted. As they say, all's well that ends well. Sometimes, however, it's hard to understand how a good evening is even possible. In my opinion, the craziest story of this video happened in 1984 to Forthman Murph. At the time, he was already 74 years old, 10 of which he dedicated to the hard and dangerous business of logging. On that May day, he took his chainsaw again and got to work. Murph was sawing a large, sturdy tree after calculating where it would fall and where it would be safe to stand. So the lumberjack made the last cut, and the tree started falling. Suddenly, it pulled a high-hanging branch along. The branch hit Murph and kicked him into a ditch. Already on the ground, the man was watching the horrible domino effect of the trees felling each other until one of them landed on his leg. Murph realized his limb was smashed before he went unconscious for a bit. When the man came around, he immediately realized that his broken leg was the least of his problems. As it turned out, after he lost consciousness, his neck landed on the chainsaw that was still working. Just imagine this terrifying scene. Surprisingly, this only angered Murph. He kicked the chainsaw aside and drove his truck to the nearest dwelling with a broken leg and a critical neck injury. He had to wait another hour to finally arrive at the hospital. There, the surgeons literally sewed his head back on, as it was only supported by the spine. How do you survive after something like that? It's hard to even imagine. However, Forthman Murph managed to do so much more than just survive. He completely regained his health, lived to be 92 years old, and always made fun of this crazy story. Life itself is so incredible that it's full of events most of us couldn't come up with if we tried. So, if you'd like to hear this kind of story, welcome to my channel.